Well, hello there. Today is April 29th, 2017, and we're within the Eileen J. Garrett Library. In fact, we have a bust of Eileen J. Garrett overlooking all our programs as she is, wherever she is. And today we're here with Walter Meyer Erpen from Canada. So, fair warning, I want you to know that apart from appreciating his academic pursuits and his professional career, I'm also personally very fond of him. So we have a nice friendship. So if we slide off into being a little bit less than austere researchers, you'll understand where that's coming from. So Walter, hello.
Hello. Yes.
I'm glad to see you back at the library.
Likewise, I'm glad to be here. It's been a few years.
It has been a few years, but we stay in contact. But for our viewers, tell me, what is your present affiliation?
I'm a consultant archivist professionally, and I'm also the president of the Survival Research Institute of Canada, because survival research was my primary interest. That's how I got involved in this whole field.
Good, you're going to tell me in a little bit how you actually got involved in the field, but I'm very proud to say that you also serve as the Parapsychology Foundation International Affiliate representing Canada.
For Canada, yes.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah,
So
I'm very honored to do so.
Good. So now tell me now, how did you get involved in survival research, or what was the hook that led you to that?
Well, that's going back a long ways, I guess 40 years, because my first contact was through spiritualism, through the Spiritualist Church in Canada, in my hometown of Nanaimo, British Columbia. When I was a teenager, I went a few times, and once with my mother, to a Spiritualist church service, and a medium who was the minister of that small church gave me a message, which was very meaningful and very needed at that point in my life. So containing both evidence of the survival of my maternal grandfather, but also a very uplifting, encouraging words that helped me as a troubled teenager get over a rather bad spot.
Now, did that so-called message impress upon you and help you, or was your mother impressed with this? Was the family impressed with this, going to the spiritualist church, or this was just something that really impressed you at the time?
Well, it impressed me to think that my grandfather was standing between my mother and I, and that the medium accurately gave his name, and the evidence wasn't great evidence of life after death, but just the circumstances were compelling to me, and the fact that he was there for me, or claimed to be there for me, when I was going through some troubled times as a teenager. So it was more a
caught your attention.
Yeah, it was a personal message that gave me hope, gave me strength to carry on as a teenager. So that message, one of those messages that in the terms of within a period of 3, without saying whether it was 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, that things would be better. And in fact, it was a period of 3 years, and things were markedly better within that time frame. So,
did you try in your studies to pursue that academically, or was this just a self-study thing, just something, a current interest that you continue to read on your own?
Yeah, I went to, continued off and on to go to a spiritualist church, I guess including when I came back I lived in Europe for a year and then came back, and when I was living in Vancouver, went to a spiritualist church off and on for a number of years. Was quite involved with spiritualism, but then, I guess in the late 80s and early 90s, I became more interested in the academic study of survival evidence, and I discovered Dr. Hamilton's research in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and the main book resulting from that research was called Intention and Survival, surviving personalities either known to us or spirit guides that may be trying to influence research, psychical research as it was called then, rather than survival research. So I became very interested in that and started an academic study, and that's when I started more to see myself as a survival researcher rather than a spiritualist.
I see.
So for many years I was interested in life after death and the question, and then there was a relative who visited Vancouver in 1982, summer of 1982, and we'd been out for a lovely evening up to Grouse Mountain, and suddenly I got a call in the middle of the night from paramedics that he'd had a heart attack, and could I come to the hotel? So this was a hotel in downtown Vancouver. I was only living a few blocks away, and I raced up there to be with his wife as he's being, resuscitated on the floor of the hotel room, and then off he goes to,
ICU or whatever.
In the ambulance, and Marguerite went with him. Of course, he doesn't survive. He passes away. So that was another one of those moments that really made me start thinking again. Geez, he was here. We had a great evening, and we're coming down the gondola down from the mountain, and you see this loving relationship between this couple who's 57 at the time. I think they were both the same age, and they're holding hands, and you see this love between the two of them, and boom, he's gone.
Across the veil, yeah.
Within
the curtain drops.
Not even 10 hours. Probably 7 or 8 hours later. I'm there at 3 a.m. He's gone. Yeah. He was gone when he left the hotel room. He didn't make it to the hospital alive. So that was another turning point for me. And then that fall, I was already at that time living in Vancouver. I became more involved and I'd gone a few times to a spiritualist church, and then started sitting in a development circle, thinking that I could develop
your own development. Yeah.
I could develop within the context of spiritualism. I could develop
a greater sensitivity
or mediumistic abilities, and it was something I thought, geez, I really, to be able to understand this, I really want to learn how to develop to become a medium. I got over that.
Was it successmal, the development?
No. I mean, I did it over a large number of years, including, as you referenced earlier, we, in the end, from the 1990s, we had a circle in my home in Victoria with my partner at the time, and for a large number of years, I think from 1994 through 2010, we consistently had sittings of one sort or another in my home.
That's a lot of dedication. That's a lot of, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why when people ask, I say, no, I don't really want to do it again. Been there, done that. And I don't see that as a forward path for me. I think I've learned what I could from that within the confines of spiritualism, spiritualist church circle development. And
can I ask you, how long were you sitting before you evidenced any phenomena? I mean, it's a long slog, isn't it, normally, or was it? Did you have other sensitives in the circle? Or?
Definitely, there were participants who were more mediumistically inclined than I felt I was. And initially, we weren't trying to get physical phenomena. And initially, the purpose of the circle, both before it moved into my home, or the group split, and the part of it then continued in my home. We were a circle for the development of mental mediumship.
So
that was the precursor until we met this British medium by the name of Anne Wright, who was visiting Canada and was a friend of one of our circle members. She was invited, and I think it was the fall of 1998. She came, and she had just experienced table movements with a fellow in the south of England, and said, "Oh, do you want to try this?" And of course we want to try it. So we tried it, and she got our little table moving over 1 or 2 sessions, I think, while she was there. So that was sort of a new opening, and I was already well aware of the Hamilton research from I guess the late 1980s. I was aware of Dr. Hamilton's research.
Now, how were you aware of Dr. Hamilton's research? Within your archival profession, or just in the literature that you?
None of this had anything to do with my archival profession. Somebody had given me the very first books, maybe 100 books, because his wife didn't want all this stuff around, and he had to get rid of it. And so all of a sudden I got the precursor of a small bookcase full of books, and I already had some.
That was the beginning, right?
That was the beginning of creating a spiritualist library. And at the time I looked at the books, and I looked at the poor quality the photographic reproductions from the 1970s. It wasn't the original edition. Those weren't much better. I looked at those and I went, oh my God, this has got to be phony. Like, how can this stuff be real? But then you look at the caliber of the people who were involved, lawyers.
Yeah, they were not fly-by-nights, right?
Lawyers and teachers and engineers and ministers of religion and medical doctors.
Dr. Hamilton was a medical doctor?
Medical doctor and a member of the Legislative Assembly in Manitoba, and these people that were highly educated and these uneducated mediums. And I looked at it and I went, oh, it can't be real. And then there was an alleged communication from Dr. Hamilton that took place while I wasn't in my own home. We were still in another circle in the Greater Victoria area, and the communication came through my own attempts to develop mediumship, which is doubly
Yeah, that's-
problematic because you
yeah.
become the medium. You can't experiment upon yourself. Nobody's going to take you seriously. So I tried to confirm the only evidential bit of this message, and I wrote to the archivist at the time, Dr. Bennett, in Winnipeg, and he says, well, no, we can't do the research for you, but I invite you to apply for a research grant. Come to Winnipeg. So I applied, and I got in those days, 1990, 1991, a sizable research grant to go for a week or 10 days, whatever I spent
so
there.
that got you
I went.
hands-on.
I went, and I never did really resolve the issue of that spirit communication, but it started this 25-year quest that's ongoing. It's more than 25 years now. And what do you do when you go and you start to delve in, as you well know, you start to delve into it and you look at not the cheap reproductions from the 1970s, but you're confronted with an original photograph from the 1930s. It's got the full resolution, the full grain. And I looked at it and I went, oh man, some of them look three-dimensional, some look, there's curvature, there's depth, there's stereoscopic photographs that you can view
Right.
through a stereopticon, and the table levitations as well. The table levitations, these are tables that are fully in the air with no hands touching in the seance room established in the Hamilton's home.
And they had a whole bank of, I've seen some of the
Cameras,
pictures,
yeah,
all these
yeah.
cameras around.
Yeah,
right?
there's
It's
one
not just
point-
one camera,
No.
you know. No.
At one point, there were 11 cameras on two different angles facing the circle. If the circle's out front, there's two different banks of cameras, and there's 3 flash apparatus in the middle, plus Dr. Hamilton can be seen in the
He's
photographs
also-
with a remote control apparatus. So this was hugely expensive. He lost a lot of time. He wasn't putting the time into his medical practice. And
what year was this?
between
About 18?
they started the research just at the end of the war, First World War. So 1919, 1920, and there were periods where they stopped for a while, but then throughout the 1920s, all the way to 1935 when he dies. He dies in April of 1935. And they started with telepathy experiments between he and 2 individuals who were ministers, both ministers of religion, and one of whom had gone down to visit and study patients' worth. So they tried
Oh,
to
really?
repeat some of these telepathic experiments to see if that was true. And they were convinced that there was some form of telepathy between human minds. And from there they discovered that the Hamilton children's nanny, Elizabeth Poole, had the ability to cause objects to move, to cause tables to move. And they started in the parlor downstairs in front of the fireplace in the downstairs main floor of the Hamilton home. And Dr. Hamilton, with other gentlemen whom he knew who were interested in this, would sit and they would hold on to the table and they would hold on to Mrs. Poole's chair, and suddenly the whole group of them would be spun around the room on a hardwood floor. They'd be spun around, or maybe it was softwood, but spun around the floor of the parlor. On another instance where the 2 gentlemen can be seen in the photograph holding onto the table, suddenly Mrs. Poole, who is sitting there, she's being pushed back from the table, or maybe the table and the group are being pushed away from her. But they realized that something was going on that shouldn't be going on, that there was this, it wasn't called psychokinesis at the time, it was called telekinesis, but there was this force that could not be explained. And from there they went on to full non-contact table levitations that were photographed repeatedly in the seance room that was constructed.
How many
upstairs.
pictures are there? How many photographs are there?
Well, there's hundreds. Hundreds of photographs taken from, because there were these 11 cameras.
Right.
He could take 3 photographs without having to change the plates. So,
Wow, that's
there's
wonderful.
hundreds of photographs altogether. But then in 1928, a new medium is introduced to the group. And it becomes more problematic because at first you've just got this table and a group of people
Now
in
the
a
medium
room.
isn't in a cabinet.
You've got the cabinet
Is
as
it?
well.
Oh, it is.
You've got the cabinet, you've got the medium, Mrs. Poole seated in the cabinet, and over time they had 2 different cabinets. They had a larger cabinet constructed a little bit later. But so at first all you're studying is an object in a room that bounces around, will invert itself, fly out of the cabinet upside down with the legs in the air. They tried to contain the table in the cabinet. Even Malcolm Bird, who was research officer for the American Society for Psychical Research, he visits Winnipeg and is supposed to control the cabinet with this curtain. Well, he's unsuccessful. The cabinet inverts itself and flies out. And Hamilton invited his medical doctor colleagues. They came. They were completely
Blown away,
dumbfounded by what they
really.
saw. There were somebody who became a very well-known individual in Canadian public policy visited, and others who said there's no way, it's not possible, it doesn't happen. But you can see from their eyes when they're caught in the flash, they're in the corner, and all of a sudden they see this table, they're just,
Well, when you're face to face with what you deem to be the impossible,
Yep.
it really shakes you. I know I experienced some table levitation through the offices of Anne Gaiman, and it was unexpected, and the mind boggles, right? It really turns things. It's not only the table that goes on end; it sort of puts everything in a different perspective. Yeah.
And you have to grapple with, is this really, I mean, the common explanation among spiritualists, and I believe Anne Gaiman is a spiritualist minister, so she's probably coming at it from the perspective that those were spirits who were moving the table, whereas I personally came to the conclusion that it is a human energy that's augmented in a group, and some people have
group dynamic somehow.
But some people have it more in abundance. I think there probably are people that are physical mediums, not that it's a spirit force necessarily, but
well, that leads me to a question. What about ectoplasm? What's ectoplasm, or was ectoplasm being extruded during the Hamilton? What do you call it? Circle, or was that part and parcel? No, it was mostly table levitation.
Well, not during the table. No, what I was going to say is not during the table levitations. There's no evidence of ectoplasm during that phase of the phenomena. But from 1928 onward, a new medium joined the group, Mrs. Marshall, Mary Marshall, and she was able to produce what is known as ectoplasm. So they started, and there were numerous cases in which ectoplasm was photographed. I think it's on 50 different evenings. They took 60 flashlight exposures, or not flashlight, but flash exposures, and they obtained photographs of something like 70 different discrete pieces of ectoplasm over those 50 experiments. And so the group from 1928 till 1934 experimented with, is this real? Can it be photographed? And they did searches of the mediums and the sitters before and after. They had a well-known lawyer there, and they wrote up reports, they took minutes, they had attendance registers. So the group became convinced of the reality of ectoplasm. And what was really unique about the ectoplasm in the case of the Hamilton Circle is that there were these miniature faces in some of the ectoplasmic.
Those are the faces that are embedded in the, say if it's cotton wool, I mean, I'm not saying it is, but that's...
So it's highly problematic, because whereas I can convince myself that table levitations, table movements, object movements has nothing to do with spiritual survival, when all of a sudden you're getting these miniature faces in the ectoplasm that are, sometimes the same so-called spirit comes multiple times. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who was a well-known preacher in London, he dies in the 1890s, he tries to manifest on, I think, at least, I think it's maybe 4 occasions, his likeness shows up in the ectoplasm. Oliver Lodge was still living at the time. He somehow, an image of Oliver Lodge is projected into the ectoplasm. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle shows up on 2 different occasions with 2 distinctively different facial likenesses. Nobody denies it looks like Conan Doyle. And all of these people, all of these spirits are claiming that they are
claiming they are spirits. Yes.
They're claiming they are the spirits of the dead, and they are trying to manifest to prove their survival. And all of this is going on with the main spirit control of Mary Marshall being Walter Stewart Stinson, who was well known in Boston as
wasn't that the brother of Marjorie?
The brother of Marjorie Crandon. So Marjorie and Walter
and was
were
he
born
her control?
He was
Boston?
yes, that's right. Good point. He was the same control. So
he was busy. He was bi-coastal. He was over in Boston
and in Winnipeg.
And Winnipeg.
Yeah. At the same time, they were both the groups were still meeting, and it was never proven. Dr. Hamilton was never convinced necessarily that it was the same Walter.
Yes.
And Walter has since been manifesting through the physical medium Stuart Alexander in Britain. So we can't prove it's the same Walter. Individuals from all those groups have been convinced that it is the same Walter, but it seems pretty clear that if an individual or an entity, whatever you want to call it, a spirit control, that wants to be called Walter, or is allowing himself to be called Walter, is able to cause these physical phenomena in all three groups. So it's fascinating. So much we can't prove. Spirit controls don't prove life after death, because we know that the Owens group
did the imaginary
the
ghost,
Toronto Society for Psychical Research, that attracted a lot of attention. They had an imaginary ghost.
Well, Garrett, within her mental mediumship, always said that she didn't feel that she was rendering necessarily proof of survival, that the information that she was eliciting or bringing forth perhaps could be, from other means, telepathy being first on the list. So she wasn't, well, she was a little odd anyway, because she was ambivalent, right, with her Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I believe in the paranormal, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I don't, on Sunday, I don't give a damn.
Yeah.
But we don't say that too loudly in the library.
But she needed a day off. But,
that's it, yeah.
No, but the fact that she would go to telepathy as an explanation, I mean, when you look at the history of psychical research, I think it was Renee Haynes in her book said that, and that's, to me, when I read that, when I was reading some of the mainstream psychical research literature, and she's doing her review of 100 years of what have we learned of 100 years of the Society for Psychical Research, she felt that telepathy and psychokinesis were pretty much proven, that a majority of individuals, parapsychologists, would accept that. Now, not all do. I mean, there's a lot of parapsychologists who will not accept psychokinesis. But interestingly, as I said earlier, the group at the Society for Psychical Research in Britain, they did. They do. They are very receptive to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a question. It's so tantalizing, right? I mean, it's so many, raises so many questions.
But ectoplasm is highly problematic for parapsychologists. I don't think I've met any professional parapsychologists who want to, apart from maybe Rosemary Pilkington. I think Rosemary Pilkington
and Stephen Browdy, right?
Stephen Browdy, I think that's right. Yeah,
the roller money from the PA that they've been investigating.
Certainly they're
mediumship.
Open to the reality,
Well,
the
I
possibility
think to be intellectually curious about a phenomena that seems to be in existence, and to get to the bottom of that one.
And so things evolved, and I encountered Dr. Hamilton's research and the book title, Intention and Survival, and then I guess I became aware of the work of Arthur and Joyce Berger in Florida, the Survival Research Foundation, and communicated by snail mail at the time with Arthur and Joyce, and phone calls, and was very taken by what they were doing, and that had been created by Susie Smith. She'd actually founded
was a good friend of Eileen Garrett and a friend too.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, and I had a phone call with Susie Smith at one point during the early 1990s, but I started to use the name Survival Research Institute of Canada from about 1990 onward, I think, already turning towards survival research. And we incorporated in 2000, and so we've been incorporated with federal charitable status in Canada since 2000.
Good, so we're taking donations if we get any, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Did you hear that?
We do accept donations, yes. Yep.
Okay.
On both sides of the border. Lisette has a tax number here in the United States, and in Canada we can accept them either through the University of Manitoba, through the Psychical Research Archives Endowment Fund, or through the Survival Research Institute of Canada. So
good.
If anybody's willing to support us in this research, we would really appreciate it, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Who is responsible, or who is the guardian of the specialized collections in Manitoba?
Well, currently, my colleague, Dr. Shelley Sweeney, is the University Archivist at the University of Manitoba Archives and Special Collections. We met in the Archival Studies program at UBC 35 years ago, I guess, now. So it's a friendship and professional relationship that goes back a long ways. So she's been responsible for the University Archives since the mid-1990s, I would think.
That's wonderful that she's been open to this, and that the university allows the collections to be gathered up and cared for. Yeah,
so it was thanks to her predecessor, Richard Bennett, Dr. Richard Bennett, that the collection was acquired in the first place. The daughter, the Hamilton's daughter, Margaret Hamilton Bach, was still living, so there was no question about the authenticity of the collection. The collection went from the family to the University Archives.
Some of the family members at one of your previous lectures? Yes, for sure.
Yeah, when Susan was in
Susan
town,
McWilliam Williams was
was
doing.
in town.
Yeah.
That's, I think that was the time that Janice Hamilton, a granddaughter, and her son, David, came to New York, and
attended your lecture.
yeah, it was a good, very nice visit with everyone that time.
For sure.
So, but you're probably interested in the table levitation
I
phenomena.
think so. You're going to be speaking for the foundation, at the foundation about table levitation, and I think
Right.
tomorrow, so.
And I have previously spoken,
Definitely,
I think, on we've done
definitely, and
tables
been a grantee
couple
of the foundation,
times.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So this medium, Anne Wright, came from Britain, and she got the table moving, and it's like, oh my God, you don't believe it. The next day you
You
think,
replay the tape in your mind,
yeah,
don't
and you
Yes.
think, was that really real, and who can I tell? And then you realize, well, you can't really tell anyone because everybody at work will think you're mad.
Yeah.
So you just suppress it, and you quietly, as previous generations did, you continue the experimentation, but you do it very quietly on your own.
Mm.
So we tried for the next year, and nothing happened. We just couldn't get the table.
How often did you meet?
At that time, we were probably trying to meet weekly, except for the summer, but we were trying to meet weekly.
Uh-huh.
And nothing happened for almost a year. And then Anne Wright was coming back to visit her friend Diane again, Diane and Pete. She was
So
coming
was
back
she
to
the
visit.
agent, you think?
She was the medium.
catalyst.
Yeah, she was the medium. She'd been exposed to it. She probably is, somewhat of a physical medium as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She was coming back. And about that time, Pete, Diane's husband, Pete, joined the group. And it turned out that he was very strong as well. So it was really within a week or two of Anne coming back that suddenly we got the table moving again. The table started moving. Now this is a fairly sturdy table by IKEA, built by IKEA. 30 inches, almost square, 30 by 29 and a half square, and the corners, the legs are at the outer edges, at the outer corners, which is really important that you don't have a lot of surface overhang, because you don't want...
Yeah, you don't want to be able to be seen.
Yeah, or leveraging. If you're going to leverage it down, you need,
Was it fairly heavy?
It's 21 pounds, I believe, that table. So it's not the lightest table. But anyway, we got the table going again, and Anne came and visited. She was happy that we hadn't lost what she taught us the previous year. And
Right.
from there on in, we did table phenomena for all the way through to 2010. Finally, I closed it down in 2010 after we lost, Albert and Neville had passed away in their 80s within 5 months of one another. And then Deborah died very suddenly in 2008.
Yeah.
So, and we tried to continue because we felt we should. But
Right.
the energy was gone. It was,
Yes.
and Diane and Pete had moved further away from us at that point. They were moving, I think they were living up at an hour north of where we are. So it was just too problematic to get a core group together at that point. So
That chapter closed.
yeah, and it was a relief actually to stop the pretense that the group could continue, because it had done what it could, which was a huge run by comparison to most spiritualist study groups, which is what we were. We were, till the end, we were a spiritualist study group. It was a much longer run at it than most groups.
Did you develop anything sort of like the Conjuring Up Philip or whatever? Any personages apart from the table movement? Whatever, I mean, like Conjuring Philip, the Owen work, or...
Yeah, we tried, we didn't want to, because
Didn't want to mix the...
Yeah, because we were a spiritual study group, we didn't want to go down that road of creating an imaginary ghost. We didn't need to, because, I glossed over this, but the table really became active when we discovered that Pete had a guide, a First Nations guide, named Grey Cloud. So we had Grey Cloud as the primary guide, and there were several other spirit guides, spirit controls, who would come in
manifest.
and would help with the table movements. And I mean, it was really fascinating. We had a retired aeronautical engineer visit us on a number of occasions, William Stoney. I don't think he'll mind his name being invoked.
He's another friend of the foundation. Bill.
And he participated when we did a documentary with Iris Owen. He participated in the documentary and was willing to be visible in the documentary, which some of our group members are unfortunately were not able to be, because they were in the prime of their careers with government, and it wasn't
Busy
probably
with other things,
a
and
very good
wasn't-
idea to be publicly out there doing table lifting. But no, Grey Cloud, the table phenomena were strongest when Grey Cloud was there. So, I mean, your grandmother had some spirit controls as well,
Definitely,
right?
yes.
And what's the story of when she banished the spirit controls? I think, was that maybe not
Well,
banished
she
them, but...
she didn't banish them, but she would work along in 10-year increments, and I think she would get impatient. She was always leaving mediumship, and yet was always drawn back to it, and I don't think the controls ever really left her. I mean, just because she wasn't practicing regularly as a medium. but I think she said she was always traveling around with the two of them, so they seem to remain with her. But you also interfaced with the science of parapsychology, right? You've you've presented at various parapsychological conferences. What's your take on parapsychology? Were they amenable to or welcoming of your table circle and your research and your survival edge, or did they give you a wide pass?
Well, it's a difficult question because professional parapsychologists I don't think they really want to deal with the physical phenomena, maybe even the possibility of physical phenomena. Unfortunately,
it's very complex too. I mean, that's
There's been unfortunately there's been so much fraud during the whole history of mediumship and spiritualism, and even within psychical research, there have been known cases of fraud. So I think a generation of parapsychologists who sort of got involved in the 1960s and onward, they didn't want to touch the physical phenomena at all.
Well, it was dangerous. They had enough junketing around with mental mediumship and other things.
Yeah, quantitative studies, which you cannot reduce table levitations or ectoplasmic experiments to laboratory settings in any easy fashion. So, no, not the most receptive, but certainly I've spoken at the Society for Psychical Research in London, and that was a very receptive, very welcoming, and I was quite surprised that I gave the table levitation lecture there. As part of the Tate
the Tate Memorial Lecture.
Tate Memorial Lecture one year, and I was really surprised. It was among the best questions, well attended, best questions, and the majority of people there. When I ask often how many people here believe that table movements or macro psychokinesis is possible, the vast majority of them just accepted it. I was really taken aback, because most often you get sort of a 50-50, but those folks were well enough read or well enough at experienced different things in their lives that they believed that the phenomena is real. And I certainly have come to that conclusion, that I have no doubt about the validity of macro PK, an energy that's manifested even in a relatively small group. 2 or 3 or 4 can move tables, and I think historically there have been individuals who have caused levitations of their own accord, including some of the religious figures whose bodies were supposed to levitate. So I think it's a genuine phenomenon. I don't believe necessarily that it has anything to do with spirit. I think, in fact, when you look at the research of George and Iris Owen, the imaginary ghost, I think they proved that it's a group phenomenon. And of course, there's a lot of people who want to say, well, no, that was actually a ghost that fooled them. It was a real ghost that got in there and fooled the Owens and became Philip. But I think the evidence...
That seems a bit of a stretch.
To me it does. But I met the Owens. I was fortunate to, you knew them well, but I was fortunate to meet George and Iris.
Very, very down to earth, practical people, and not necessarily total believers that would.
No, absolutely not. No, they weren't. They weren't. I mean, they were academics. They were not spiritualists. They were psychical researchers.
We published. Garrett Publication did his. Can we explain the poltergeist? I think, and was it Science, Spook, and some? There was another one, I forget, but a very valued researcher for sure.
Yeah. And so I had the good fortune to meet them. They came to a presentation I did in Toronto in the early 1990s, and then I met them one more time while they were retired in Calgary. I met them another time, and we were fortunate that they left the remaining, what archives they still had relating to the Philip experiments, the research papers that were gathered, and that they left them to the Survival Research Institute of Canada, and now we've turned them over to Manitoba.
Well, good. Now let's talk about that.
We had them digitized, and they're available on websites, and the originals are deposited in Manitoba. So
that's wonderful. So let's get on to what you're doing currently, which is your art is based with archival preservation, and what exactly you're doing right now?
Well, I feel that given my, 30 plus years as an archivist, professional archivist, I feel that that's probably what I can bring most to the field, the most value that I can bring to the whole field of psychical research and spiritualism and parapsychology, to try to, in many cases, unfortunately, salvage all of this
Before
material.
it's lost, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's 50,
slips away.
50 years of funded research, and in many cases there's stuff going back 100 years from spiritualist churches, or almost 100 years, where there's these collections, these library and archives collections that are documenting human experience and people who try to understand what all of this means, some of whom did not at the outset believe that it was real. But you're looking at experiments going back easily to the 1930s, and that material is still out there.
Some of it is out there,
It's
yeah.
still out
yeah,
there,
yeah.
and you find bits and pieces of it coming up for sale, or people not knowing what to do with it. So
Well, you're a pretty good sleuth, aren't you? Because I tease you that Walter has a large hook, and he's constantly saving bits and pieces as you're
trying
along.
to, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
And
because-
encouraging those who've worked in the field to do so as well. So individuals who have already committed to at least donating a portion of their archives to the University of Manitoba, for instance, or Stan Krippner and Erlander Haraldsson in Iceland. Alexander Image here from Manhattan, his whole collection is already there. So there are numerous individuals who are considering donating their archives to the University of Manitoba because of the track record that institution has, having received the Thomas Glendenning Hamilton family archives in 1980. So there's a long track record there, and they're not embarrassed to make this stuff available. It's a university archives. So it's got a place, and it's a drawing card. As my colleague Shelley Sweeney, the university archivist says, the Hamilton collection has actually worked as a magnet to drawing in other collections.
Yeah, it's the heart of the thing, and it does draw other people.
Yeah, a lot of small collections, and I'm hopeful that I know there are other individuals who are considering.
Well, how for our readers, if someone has a collection or knows of a collection that is at risk or should be placed somewhere, how can they would they contact you or Ms. Sweeney? How would one?
Yeah, they're welcome to contact me, Walter Meyer at Erpen. I guess my email. Do we want an email address or?
Well, whatever, or you can always write to Parapsychology Foundation or get a hold of me through our website.
Whatever is
so
easiest.
Lisette Coly at parapsychology.org, and I will certainly make the connection for you.
Yeah,
with,
and I'm
Walter.
happy to put my email address in as well. It's W for Walter, M for Meyer, Z for Zebra, E for Elephant at islandnet.com.
Good. We'll run a credit box at the end of the
That's
thing, so
right.
you'll be able to.
Yeah, that's easier for folks. Yeah.
Good. So it seems like you have your work cut out for you, and I'd better be careful because you're eyeing the Eileen Garrett Library around here, so I'm going to have to consider too what the future holds.
Well, and you've inherited on behalf of the Parapsychology Foundation. The Parapsychology Foundation has inherited decades, 65 years of collecting. I mean, some of these books must have already been in Eileen Garrett's personal collection in 1951, right?
Oh, when she started was the kernel of the library, and then we actively, purchased other libraries and bequests, and we're still actively collecting. So definitely. So we both have our work cut out for us.
We do, and unfortunately there are an awful lot of libraries in this field that are at risk, where people just don't know what to do with them. So probably one of the best things we can do is to continue receiving those libraries and culling those libraries to add titles to these existing libraries to build.
Put the whole mosaic together, and maybe we'll come up with some answers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So on to the answers in the future.
Yes, I always enjoy being here and enjoy working with you.
You're coming back, right?
I'm absolutely coming back, yes.
Wonderful, for those archives.
Yes,
All right, thank you very much,
yes.
Walter.
Thanks, Lisette.
All right. Hi there, I'm Lisette Coly. I'm president of Parapsychology Foundation, so welcome to our YouTube channel. We have lots to look at, so please check out our videos. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.